Welcome back to Transformative Journeys with Johanna. I'm your host, and whether you're listening in while you're on your evening walk, keeping me company while you fold the laundry, in your truck during your commute to work, or somewhere in between, I'm really glad you're here. As we wrap up season 1, I know, right? Not only did this scared and hesitant little indie podcaster from Ontario manage to put out a full season's worth of episodes, she's getting ready to take on season 2 and digging even deeper into the shit that makes us tick as humans. Anyways, as I got ready to start thinking about how I wanted to finish off the season, I found myself sitting in my pickup truck one day on my lunch break, watching some kids scrambling all over the play equipment where I go to park and get away from peopling at the office. And I started thinking, do you remember what it was like, Johanna, to not even think to yourself how very brave it was to just not overthink stuff and just do it? Just climbing to the top of that ladder, to the top of the slide, and then letting yourself slide all the way down without worrying about what was going to happen at the bottom. Either trusting that a parent or caregiver was going to be there to catch you, or better yet, that you were completely capable of landing on your feet at the bottom. And of course, because it's what I do when I'm sitting in my truck thinking, that internal dialogue moved into looking at my life now. And not quite patting myself on the back, but feeling kind of proud how, even though I was scared and unconfident and had no idea what I was doing or what I was getting myself into for that matter, I just did it. Not perfectly, looking back, not even well, definitely not confidently, but I did it. Not that I exactly remember, but I think it probably felt a lot like the first time I climbed up to the top of the really high, almost as high as the sky, it probably felt to someone under 3 feet tall, slide down at the beachside park in the same city where I live right now, and just trusted that I was going to land on my feet at the bottom and be okay. And by the way, to give you an idea of just how old I am, that slide was probably a good 12 or 15 feet tall and all metal. Something no sane park planner would countenance nowadays. And I'm pretty sure it was removed from that beachside park years ago. Anyways, looking back through some of the conversations we've had over the past year, not always the most downloaded episodes, not even necessarily, now looking back, my favorite episodes, but the conversations that when I looked at them together seemed to reflect those thoughts and that story. A story about courage, about faith and self-trust, about shedding stories we've outgrown, and about landing somewhere you were finally brave enough to go. And maybe even discovering that we deserved to go there all along. Maybe not always gracefully, and maybe with your butt sticking in places on a griddle hot surface of self-reflection. Because if there's one thing I've learned through creating this podcast, it's that growth doesn't usually happen all at once. It happens in baby steps. And sometimes when you look at what it takes to grow, it's pretty fucking uncomfortable and maybe even a little painful sometimes. Growth sounds awesome in motivational quotes. In real life, it often looks like uncertainty, self-doubt, a bit of analysis paralysis, and maybe wondering if we've lost our fucking minds to want to try something outside of our comfort zone. First, we start questioning. Then we start noticing the stories we've been carrying. Then maybe we begin letting go of the ones that no longer fit. And eventually, if we're willing, we start practicing becoming someone new. So today's episode is a little different because I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey. Think of it as a guided tour through 4 conversations that together represent some of the biggest ideas I think we've explored here on Transformative Journeys. And if you've ever felt the pull to become something more fully yourself, I hope these conversations help. We're actually going to start right at the very beginning because every transformation begins the same way, with permission. Permission to try, permission to fail, permission to want something more. So this is episode 1, Taking Chances. Do you ever daydream about trying something new and then tell yourself you're too old, or it's too late to start a new dream, or maybe you've told yourself you don't have the education or the training, or I don't know, fill in the blanks, to do something that you've never done before? This episode is about thinking again. I want to talk to you about stepping out of your comfort zone to take chances and start breaking through your fears about trying something new. A new podcast, for example. So let's dig into that. And here we go, with a little bit of fear and trepidation. I might be starting messy, as they say, but I'm starting with the hope that if you're listening today, you'll stick with me as I learn and get better and, nail down this podcasting, talking into a mic, audio editing software stuff as I learn and get better. So welcome to the first episode of Transformative Journeys with Johanna. And guess what? I'm Johanna. I want to be 100% transparent with you on this podcast. The good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'm going to tell you right off the bat that I haven't always been very brave. I spent most of my life worried about what other people would think and letting my desire for the approval of people who I thought mattered dictate what I was willing to do or not do, try or not try. So don't get me wrong, I've done my share of quietly and privately stepping off the beaten path to explore a variety of things, but it used to be just that. Privately for years. For example, I kept my interest in unconventional, shall we say, spirituality hidden in my bedside table drawer. Worried about what people would think, worried about what my family would say. And it wasn't that I thought religion or spirituality were private. I mean, nobody kept their Christianity or their Judaism or their Buddhism secret, but I somehow felt that I needed to keep mine secret because it wasn't mainstream and I was afraid of being judged. And another example is about 17 years ago, I began peer mentoring and public speaking around advocacy for the organization that I volunteer with. And I didn't tell my family about it at first because I was very used to feeling like whatever I was doing or was interested in wasn't valued, or always feeling like I didn't live up to their expectations, or even just hearing, disparaging comments when I started something about how I never followed through with anything. And the reasons for that are definitely food for thought for another episode, but I'm also a Gemini. And the truth is, I tend to have wide-ranging interests. Some of them I just want to skim through, maybe try once or twice to pacify a mild interest, read a little bit about, and then move along. And others I dive into long and deep and almost to the level of obsession. It's just that my interests were never the same as their interests, so they weren't valued, and living up to their expectations was a bit of a struggle. So the unfortunate truth about that particular situation was that I wasn't wrong to be hesitant about telling my family about my volunteer work, because when I did share it with my parents, my dad's first comment was, "But is she any good at it?" As if that was the point or even mattered. But with age comes wisdom, and hopefully wisdom nurtures courage. Courage to release that which doesn't serve our own higher good, like the need for approval or even acceptance from the people who aren't living our life. And when you choose to be courageous, you're also risking vulnerability. And just to be clear, vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is very courageous. Brene Brown, who I absolutely adore her work, she calls herself a shame researcher, but it's about way more than shame. She talks about emotions and, really articulating and learning to articulate and defining our emotions and understanding where they're coming from. It's just, I find it fascinating. And she defines vulnerability as opening ourselves up to uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. She also says you cannot have courage without vulnerability, because every act of true courage exposes you to the risk of uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure, or all three. So deciding to start this podcast is a huge step into the unknown for me, along with the excitement of trying something new. There's been a little voice at the back of my head that's been whispering, what if nobody likes it? What if you suck at it? What if the people you know make fun of you or talk behind your back about how stupid it is? What if it doesn't work out? What if you suck at it? What if the people you know make fun of you or talk behind your back about how stupid it is? What if it doesn't work out? So taking risks can be intimidating, even frightening. But the truth is, I think they can also be incredibly rewarding. It can lead to new opportunities for growth that we never imagined about ourselves. And often the more daunting the undertaking, the sweeter the reward at the end. And fail or succeed, the true reward is in the journey. And I couldn't find the original author of this quote, but I love it. It's, failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of success. A year ago, I never imagined myself as a podcaster. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I mean, a lot. And a lot of really good ones, where they've been doing it a long time. They've either perfected the whole audio and recording thing, or they're at the point where they have, people they pay, professionals they pay to do it. And sometime last summer, I started to think, you know what? I think I could do this. I've been through some shit in my life. I think I have things I could share. I think I could help some people through some stuff. So here I am, literally right around the corner from 59 years old, excited, but more than a little bit nervous, because I am totally leaping into the unknown with, technology I've never encountered, and the idea of sitting behind a mic and kind of sharing my thoughts and strategies I've used over the years, and especially, in recent years, and maybe digging into a little bit of personal stuff, and basically preparing to embark on one more new adventure. And it struck me that too many people have let themselves fall into the trap of believing that they're too old to start something new. They maybe listen to the stereotypical misconceptions about age and personal growth, but I believe that age is just a number. Our capacity to learn and grow might evolve, but it doesn't diminish with age, and nor do I think that our capacity for learning is limited to mental and emotional self-development. I started learning to ride a dirt bike 4 years ago at the ripe old age of 54, and it has been tremendously challenging at times, physically and mentally. My best friend just started learning last summer, and she's 10 years older than I am. And then she went and got her street bike license. Like, how cool is that? And how's that for courage? And one of the things, the really great things about learning to ride a dirt bike has been helping to teach me to try and look past my fear. After breaking my wrist in a fall a couple of summers ago, I was literally brought back to a confidence level lower than the first year I was riding. I became timid on my bike in a way that I hadn't been before, and I was forced to step back and evaluate what I needed to do to start to rebuild that confidence again. That meant coaching, going back, taking lessons again, which I took with my grandsons. A few years before, when I was first starting to learn how to ride, they thought I was the coolest grandma ever, because what other grandma actually takes their grandkids to dirt bike lessons and actually does them with them? But anyways, so, this whole process involved going back and taking lessons again, acknowledging where my fears were coming from, and making a commitment to myself to try and figure out what I needed to do to build up my confidence again, even if that meant starting near the beginning and taking baby steps forward, working on my basic skills to help me start believe in my capabilities again. And I'm a firm believer in baby steps forward for a lot of things, especially those things where it takes a lot of courage to step forward at all. Baby steps, little baby steps. As long as you're moving forward, it doesn't matter how small the baby steps are. So for me, from, learning how to navigate my grief journey after my 22-year-old son died, and not just surviving, but learning to how to pull the pieces of my life back together, and then going on to be trained to provide peer mentor support to others on similar journeys, and learning how to overcome my fear and insecurity over public speaking, to become a public speaker, to advocate for change, and now launching this podcast. My journey's been full of unexpected turns, and each one of them has taught me something new. So I'm 59 years old and around the corner. I'm not quite 59 years old, but it's very close. And I'm still discovering new passions and skills, whether it's riding my dirt bike, learning how to podcast, working on adapting some of the workshops I've done in my grief mentorship role that I think will help others through general personal growth and transformation. I don't plan for my journey to end ever. And Transformative Journeys is about embracing change and growing through life's challenges. It'll be about turning adversity into empowerment. I can't empower you, but I want to help you empower yourself. I can encourage you. I can share my thoughts. I can share tools and strategies that I have found have helped me on my journey and that I hope can help you become a more empowered person. But I can't make you use those tools, and I can't empower you. And listen, I don't get it right all the time. I don't always do all the things that I know will help me when I'm struggling with something. I still go through life super messy all the time. But let me tell you, I've been on the planet for, almost 59 full turns around the sun, and I've had my share of challenges. From childhood baggage to infidelity in marriage, divorce, child loss, just a lot. I didn't do it all right. I was a teen parent. Was I perfect? No. Was I a great parent? I always worry about whether or not I was, but I tried hard to be a good parent, and I did the best I could with the tools that I had at the time. I raised 3 teenagers with all the stress and drama and chaos and mayhem that entails. Did I do that right? Looking back, not always. When I look back, there were lots of things that I wish I'd done differently, but I did the best I could with the tools I had at the time. And that's all any of us can do. The thing is, the biggest thing I've learned is that we can't avoid having challenges in life. What we can do is to empower ourselves with tools, strategies, and ways to build resilience so we can navigate those challenges and come out as more than a survivor, becoming a better version of ourselves on the other side. So during these podcasts, my hope is to inspire you to take steps forward, to move past the initial chaos of whatever life challenges you might be going through, to embrace new opportunities and face those challenges head on and continuously grow no matter what your age or your background is. And today, I want to encourage you to take that leap, whatever it might be. Start that project, take that course, or dive into that new hobby. You're never too old to pursue your dreams. In the words of the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. Today, we talked about learning to start to let go of our past, about taking chances and overcoming fear, about embracing new challenges at any age, and about not being afraid to start something new. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. If you enjoyed it or you think it would be helpful to someone, please share it or leave a review. I would love to know your thoughts. Next time, we're going to dive into what it means to rebuild from the ashes of a challenging event. One of those defining moments where you realize that everything has changed, and now you need to navigate a new and unexpected route. Until then, this is Johanna reminding you that it doesn't matter if you fall. What matters is how well you bounce. This is Transformative Journeys. See you next time. Listening to that episode now feels a little bit like getting out of a time machine and stepping into an old life. The excitement, the uncertainty, and the truth is, listening to someone who was still cautiously peering around to see if she was even allowed to do what she was doing. Not because someone was stopping me, not because I didn't have lots of encouragement happening quietly in the background. My husband buying me my first microphone and helping me set up my office to try and get better acoustics and less echo. Asking me very gently every now and then when I was going to start or how it was coming along. And patiently nodding through my excuses about tech and software and needing to finish building my website. And so many of us spend years quietly waiting for permission. Permission to be who we are. Permission to take up space. Permission to fall a little short of expectations. Permission to be something more than maybe people around us have supported us to be in the past. Taking chances can be really hard. And figuring out why we're so afraid to take them in the first place, that's sometimes even harder. Because underneath most fear is a story. An old, learned, memorized, and internalized story about who we are and what we're capable of, about who we should be and what we deserve, and about what might happen if we step outside of the role we've always played in that story. So that's where the next conversation takes us. Because I finally stopped asking, what if I fail? And started asking, where did I learn to believe that I couldn't succeed? This next episode is about the stories we inherit long before we're old enough to question them. Because y'all know by now, it doesn't matter if you fall. What matters is how well you bounce. This is episode 10, Rewriting the Stories You Were Told. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself who wrote the story you're living? Because here's the truth. Most of us didn't. We inherited it from parents, teachers, coaches, religious figures, media, and systems that told us who we were, what we were worth, and what we should believe about ourselves. And for a long time, most of us lived by that story. This week, we're digging deep into how those stories get written for us and how we can stop allowing others to hold the pen that has written and maybe continuing to write our story. Spoiler, it's not about erasing the past. It's about understanding the chapters that were written for us before so we can write the ones that are truly ours moving forward. So let's dig into that. Welcome back to Transformative Journeys with Johanna, and hey, it's still Johanna here. Our story starts being written for us long before we can hold a pen to write it, long before we can even start using words or begin to think we have a story. others around us started to shape our identity and our perception of who we were from almost the time we were born. And they continued to shape it through our developmental years and even into our teens and as young adults. Then societal pressure kicks in, telling us more about who we should be and how we should write our story in order for us to fit in. And in childhood, we are not the authors. Our caregivers, teachers, and early influencers, and even our friends narrated our world to us. You might have heard things like, she's the shy one, or he's my sensitive child. Or how about, you were always loud right from the time you were born. Or maybe, it's okay, you're not very good at math. How about, you never finish anything you start. Or, she's a little caretaker, always looking after her baby brother. And some of my favorites, she's boy crazy, or he's a wild one, no self-restraint at all. Most of these things might seem harmless or even affectionate, but the truth is that these early messages get internalized as truth and who we see ourselves as, especially during critical periods of brain development in early infancy and early childhood. But also in adolescence, when there's also significant brain development in the areas related to social development and decision making. So the parts of our brain responsible for emotional processing, our limbic system, and reasoning and identity formation, which is our prefrontal cortex, are still under construction during those periods. So the messages we hear over and over from the people around us, especially if they have emotions attached to them, actually become part of our neural pathways and become part of our core beliefs about ourselves. And since we're too young to challenge them, we don't just believe them, we become them. You see, humans are storytellers. Anthropologically, our brains are wired for story. In fact, research shows that humans are basically story processing machines. We don't just remember events, our brains automatically organize them into coherent narratives that help us make sense of the world around us so that we can then communicate them back to other people. We take pieces of events, we store them for later as memories, and then we pull them together to form a script in our heads, not just about the events themselves, but about what people said, did, or meant, or we thought they meant as well. And often the way that we put these pieces together can be a result of past experiences and how those pieces of memories made us feel at the time. So what happens when those narratives are internalized? It can affect our confidence, our relationships, our willingness to take risks, and even our ability to heal. It shows up in the stories that we tell ourselves, like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough. I can't do hard things. I'm always messing things up. My job is to make everyone happy. If people knew the real me, they wouldn't love me. Sound familiar? These aren't just passing thoughts. They are etched in there like grooves in a record. I know I'm dating myself there. But it's not all doom and gloom. It's not just who I am. And it's definitely not, I'm just going to be like this forever. Owning the narrative means actively shaping our identity, goals, and who we want to be in life, rather than letting our past or other people do it for us. It means that you get to set the terms of who you are, what you believe, and where you're going from here. And thanks to neuroplasticity, again, I'm such a brain science geek, which is our brain's incredible ability to rewire itself, our brains can change. And with a little work, we can rewrite our internal narrative. We get to pick up the pen and write the next chapter in our story, and we get to own the narrative of that new chapter. Rewiring our brains to create our own narrative isn't about saying mantras and wishful thinking. Nope. Put on your boots and buckle up, because we are on a mission of developing awareness, producing disruption, and crafting replacement. It starts with learning to recognize those old scripts when they show up, and then asking, who says this is who I am? Is this actually true? Once we start identifying those scripts, we follow up with interrupting and disrupting the pattern when those scripts come up. We're going to examine where that script came from and start looking for the evidence proving it's not true. Choosing to focus on our strengths and our successes and our positive qualities rather than perceived failures or shortcomings. And this does not mean that we are going to dwell on blame and finger pointing while we're determining where those beliefs about ourselves came from. We're proving it's not true to ourselves. We don't have to friggin' defend or explain ourselves to anyone. We then get to choose to reframe and replace those outdated or untrue scripts with new ones using language that reflects our values, our growth, and our truth. And be honest and be true to yourself about this. We are not pulling data from others' expectations of us. We are pulling it from our real lived experience. Now comes the hardest part of all those here. Sorry. Now we go out in the world and we make it our external narrative too. Now we live our story on our own terms. Sounds a bit scarier, right? It was for me. Because the truth is, some people are going to continue to try and squash you back into that old script. And some people are not going to like it when you don't let them. It might be your boss trying to cram you back down into the role you've played for years to fuel their ego or keep everyone else happy. It might be your friends who want to wedge you back into their concept of what it means to fit in. It might be your significant other who's terrified that if you grow, you're going to leave them behind. So they do their best to push you back into that old mold so that they feel safe. It might even be your family. They can sometimes push back the hardest because theirs was likely the earliest narratives you were given. And they might find it hard to let go of who they thought you were or who they wanted you to be. But you know what? Wherever it's coming from, it might be scary at first, but it's also pretty fucking awesome to start learning how to be true to yourself. The thing is, this isn't about manipulation. It's not about deception or trying to pull one over on people. You get to take your morals, your ethics, and your principles with you on this journey. It's about consistently reinforcing something about yourself that's true and authentically you. Every pen stroke in your new narrative brings you a little bit closer to bringing that story to life. It's about starting to show up and move through your life being and being seen as who you really are. It's about no longer letting ourselves be forced into playing a part in others' stories about who we are. So having said all that, here are some of my best tips on growing through writing your own narrative. The first is to be discerning about what you let into your head. whether that's on social media, commercials, billboards, television, or regular media. I like the term garbage in, garbage out. Wherever we turn, there are articles and advertising and images telling us how we ought to think, feel, and look. They tell us what we need to do to be more attractive, to be more successful, to be more, you fill in the blanks. We need to be our own content censor and start to be mindful of what we allow into our cerebral space. The second is to start paying closer attention to what that little voice in our head is saying. Do you know that according to research, the average person has approximately 60,000 thoughts per day, and that on average, about 75% of those thoughts are negative, and 95% of them are repetitive. Have you ever actually stopped and listened to what your little voice is saying or how it's making you feel? Would you talk to someone you love the way that your little voice talks to you? Of course you wouldn't. And when you start to listen, you might even find that little voice in your head isn't actually you at all. Remember, other people's narratives. So practice becoming more aware of how you are talking to you. Start asking yourself if he or she is telling the truth or if she's lying to you. When you hear yourself being negative or hurtful, start rewriting or reframing those thoughts. Instead of, I'm so stupid, try, I make mistakes like everyone else, but I'm learning from this. Or instead of, I'm just not lovable, try saying, I am worthy of love and kindness. Next, we want to start to create a clear vision of the story that we want to live out and who and how we want to be in that story. Your vision of who you want to become and the story and experience you want for your life will help you get through the hard times, the hard conversations, and the self-doubt that's still going to come creeping in. Knowing how you want to narrate your life story will help you prevent others from pushing you off your path. Next, it's time to set boundaries for yourself. And this can be hard sometimes, but it's so important. Sometimes those boundaries are around what we'll read or watch or listen to. Sometimes it means seeing less of the people who struggle the most with the new narrative we're writing for ourselves. And sometimes it means saying no. It's time to be clear about what you are or are not willing to do, who you are and are not willing to allow into your life, and what situations you'll allow yourself to be in. But above all else, as always, be gentle with yourself. When you find yourself believing your little voice or other people's narratives, gently correct yourself, reset, and move ahead. If you have a notebook or paper handy today, I'm going to encourage you to start considering what you want your new story to look like. Ask yourself these kinds of questions. What story have I been telling myself about my worth? Whose voice does that sound like? What do I want to believe instead? This week we talked about rewriting the stories we've been told and learning to write our own narrative about who we want to become. No matter what the previous part of the story was, we are free to write the next chapter, and the next, and the next. As we wrap up, I want you to remember you truly can be the author of your own story. It won't always be easy. Not everyone will be happy with your new script, but the pen is in your hands and nobody else's. And try to remember always, be kind to yourself on this journey, as well as to those who may have had a hand in writing those chapters that you want to leave behind. We are all only ever doing the best we can with the tools and information we have at the time. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Next week, we're going to be talking about boundaries, the kind that come without guilt. How to say no and still be kind. Until then, this is Johanna reminding you that it doesn't matter if you fall. What matters is how well you bounce. This is Transformative Journeys. See you next time. One of the really uncomfortable things about starting to develop self-awareness is that it rips off your rose-colored glasses, sometimes poking you in the eye for good measure. And you start to find that once you see something, you can't really unsee it. A pattern, an outmoded way of thinking, a version of yourself that just doesn't feel right anymore. And let me tell you, it's one of those blessing and curse kind of things, because it's both awesome and at times deeply inconvenient. We start to notice collisions between the stories we've been carrying around and the versions of ourselves we've been living in those stories, and who we feel we are deep down. And once it starts happening, we start noticing those clashes everywhere. Uncomfortable, inconvenient, and occasionally downright painful. We start paying better attention to our self-talk. We start examining our relationships. We maybe remember opportunities we avoided out of uncertainty and risks we didn't take out of fear, which can sometimes lead to a really hard question. If I know this story isn't the story I want anymore, why am I continuing to write it? And if you've been with me for a while here on Transformative Journeys, you know I believe we have the right to hold our own pen. And if someone else has been holding it, we can take it back, turn to the next chapter, and start writing that one ourselves. The problem is that familiar beliefs sometimes have a feeling of safety, even when they're not. Even the painful ones, the limiting ones, the ones that keep us feeling small, our brains are often happier clinging to an uncomfortable certainty happening right now than facing the unknown and uncertainty of change. Because what if it all blows up in our damn face? But the truth is, awareness is just the starting point. Sometimes that pen is heavy, awkward, and just feels too fucking scary to pick up. And letting go of those uncomfortable stories can be doubly challenging if somewhere along the line they also determined our feelings of self-worth or lack of. Or if they were what made us feel loved or needed. Or if the script was actually written in fear. But growth requires us to, at some point, start letting go. Even if it's at the top of that hot metal slide and we know it's going to burn our ass the entire way until we land back on our feet. And that brings us to the next conversation. one that became more and more important for me to start embracing as both the podcast and my own growth journey moved forward. This is episode 24, The Art of Unlearning. So I'm going to throw something out there. What if the biggest thing holding you back isn't a lack of discipline, opportunity, or talent, but an invisible chain in your mind forged by beliefs you didn't even choose and maybe aren't even aware that you're carrying around? Many of us are constantly compelled to learn more, strive more, acquire more. And don't get me wrong, it's never a bad idea to work towards developing a new skill or improving our physical health or learning new things or figuring out a new routine that's going to improve our emotional or mental health. But what if the secret to being happier, more content, and maybe even to your next breakthrough wasn't necessarily those things? What if it wasn't about adding more? What if it was slowly jettisoning some? This week, I want to talk about the radical act of unlearning and shedding some of the mental baggage and barriers that have been holding us back and limiting our potential. I'm talking about self-limiting beliefs. Beliefs like, I'm not good enough. I'll never be able to do that. I've always been this way. It's too late for me. This week, we're talking about the art of unlearning, the science-backed process of gently letting go of the internalized truths that were never really true and starting to move forward towards our dreams. So let's dig into that and break some chains. Welcome back to Transformative Journeys with Johanna. And of course, this is Johanna. And of course, we're going to be talking about something at least mildly uncomfortable for some people and downright panic-inducing for others today. Because that's what I love to do. Take my own demons, rip them apart with the sword of neuroscience, tame them with a bit of psychology and common sense, and then share my messy truths with you in the hope that, at best, it helps you step forward with more courage, or at worst, leaves you with food for thought. So, what are limiting beliefs? Let's start with a hard truth. One that's as true for every one of you as it is for me. Because nobody, and I mean nobody, has 100% self-confidence 100% of the time. We all walk through the world with internal scripts running in the background. Some of them are good scripts that affirm things we feel good about ourselves. Maybe you're a good cook and you know it. Maybe you're highly organized and feel confident in that area. Maybe you can make green things grow well, so you know you have a green thumb. You get the idea, right? But many of our internal scripts are either outright or insidiously undermining our capabilities and our belief about our own potential. These Oscar-winning scripts that were usually originally written by someone else quietly, consistently shape how we see ourselves and what we believe is possible for us, because we've woven them into our inner narrative and we've learned to own them. Psychology calls these limiting beliefs. Negative, fear-based self-perceptions or stories that we tell ourselves about our identity, about the world, or about what's possible that have become rigid assumptions about who we are what we can or can't do, and how the world works. And here's the important and the insidious part. They can prevent us from achieving our goals or being as happy as we could be. Here's the problem, though. They often sound like truth because they've been playing so long in our heads. I'm not really a numbers person. Guilty as charged on that one. I don't have the skills, education, experience to do fill in the blank with whatever you want. People like me don't get to do that. I'm not a creative person. I can't do fill in the blank. I always mess things up. I'm too old to do that. And understand this because it's really important. These aren't just self-critical thoughts, because they don't even have to be about you. They're learned beliefs about yourself and your capabilities or your circumstances, about what other people will think or do based on your actions, or what is socially acceptable, or even about life in general and how the world works. And they're often seeded in early childhood. They're hand-me-downs from family dynamics, from school systems, from community, from culture, and even emotionally charged one-off failures that branded us with shame. Hello, teacher, who humiliated me during that elementary school class multiplication table flashcard exercise. They get nurtured as teens when image is everything to us. And by adulthood, they've taken up residence and they're living rent-free in our heads forever. Maybe. So they sort of become these kind of self-fulfilling prophecies. But my question is, do they have to? Just because a belief feels familiar or even comfortably uncomfortable doesn't mean it's true. Dr. Wayne Dyer says the only limits you have are the limits you believe. You guys know I love neuroscience, so let's quickly dive into some of the brain science around this for a minute. Our brains constantly scan our environment for patterns and ways to reduce uncertainty and anxiety. And God knows they're not always successful at reducing uncertainty and anxiety, but anyways. So then they create these shortcuts in our neurocircuitry to embed that information so it's easily retrievable in the future. This is part of what science calls predictive coding. It's our brain's way of anticipating and preparing for outcomes based on previous life experiences. And there's a cute little phrase I see all the time in the research articles I read, and I actually just heard it again in a podcast I was listening to on my lunch break today. And it's neurons that fire together, wire together, which sort of means that the more often these beliefs about ourselves get activated, repeated in our heads, I'm not good at that, that never works for me, the harder they get baked into our neural wiring. So we believe them even more. And the vicious cycle just goes on, becoming what's called a cognitive schema. And that is profound and persistent ways of thinking and feeling about the world and ourselves that filter how we interpret new situations that come up. Instead of seeing something that didn't go as we'd hoped as data to help us do better next time, we actually see it as more confirmation of that limiting belief. It's a bit like putting on a pair of those solar sunglasses that you don't realize you're wearing. Everything gets filtered through that tiny hole in the lens. But I bring tidings of joy, my friends. Thanks to neuroplasticity, we can unlearn those beliefs and we can create new, more empowering self-beliefs for ourselves. But it takes intention. It takes some determination and work. And it also takes some self-compassion. So why is it so hard to let go of these inner narratives, even if we know better? If you've ever tried to talk yourself out of a limiting belief using something like a mantra and failed, you're not alone. Our beliefs don't just live in the rational part of our brains. They're stored in our bodies too. And that's not woo-woo, that's science. Our beliefs carry emotional weight too. Our brain wires them to feel like safety, like protection. Because I was made to feel so stupid and ashamed for making mistakes in math, I can avoid those feelings by telling myself that I'm not good at math. And it's better left to someone more capable than me because struggling with math makes me feel stupid and incompetent. So yes, I'm talking about me again because it's such a simple and yet powerful example of a limiting belief that I still struggle with at 59 years old. And am I bad at math? Of course not. I'm very good at some math, perfectly competent at other parts of math, don't have a clue about some math because I never actually studied it in school, and suck at times tables. Hello, PTSD. That's not bad at math or not a numbers person. That, my friends, is a limiting belief in action. Some limiting beliefs can create this whole internal conflict between what we want or desire and the patterns like procrastination, avoidance, sadness, and anger that prevents us from pursuing goals, from taking risks, or from seeing new possibilities that can help us to achieve or fulfill those goals. Unlearning takes work, but it is possible. Okay, so let's talk now about what unlearning actually looks like in practice. Many of our limiting beliefs follow a sort of framework of I'm not, I can't, I don't, or I shouldn't. They're that nagging little voice in our heads that makes us stumble when we want to try something spontaneous or something big. Things like, I can't do public speaking. I don't have the education or experience. I shouldn't say anything because I'll rock the boat. I'm not athletic. I don't deserve this praise. I'm not worthy because I got this by pure luck. Someone, whoever, says I've always been very nervous or too outspoken or overconfident. Any of these ring a bell or make you wince? Yeah, I see you there, imposter syndrome, and I've got my sort of neuroscience out of its scabbard. And even if I don't ever completely defeat you, I will cut you down to size. Anyways, do you want a truth bomb? All these convictions that we have are beliefs that could have been planted as far back as when we were in diapers, and we've been nobly holding on as if they were gospel. Now for the art of unlearning and some practical tools to help us get started, because yes, I absolutely am a work in progress here. I'll dig a little deeper into actual strategies and tools to really help us begin the process of releasing limiting beliefs in a minute, but here's a short, sort of high-level overview of the process to start. The first thing we need to do is to identify the limiting belief. Like anything, if you want to start to fix something, you need to name the problem or problems, in my case for sure. And remember, for this little part of the exercise, it's not about tackling every one of them all at once or right away. It's a self-awareness exercise that will help us determine what we want to explore further, what's having the most immediate impact on our life and our happiness, and then determining which one we want to work on slaying first. So grab a piece of pen and a paper and start writing out your biggest limiting beliefs. It's incredible how tough we can really be on ourselves. We aren't actually always aware of or recognize our limiting beliefs or thoughts. So it can even be helpful to keep a little notebook in your pocket or a thought journal for a little while. And that way, when we have a self-limiting thought, we can jot it down so that we can explore it later. Next, we need to identify the lie. Our limiting beliefs are based on a lie. So ask yourself, is this belief always true? Like always? And all of it? Then talk it out with yourself. Can I identify where this belief came from? Is it impacting my life or my happiness? And do I want to keep carrying it? Is my limiting belief closer to fact? Or have I made it an excuse? Is it rooted in fear, shame, rejection, or some other emotion? And what is some evidence that contradicts that belief? Now it's time to decide on what real belief we want to replace that limiting belief with. And this is where neuroscience really comes to life, because reframing our limiting beliefs, consistently replacing them with a real truth-centered belief, and actually practicing by doing things that prove that that old belief was a lie, rewires that predictive coding we talked about earlier and rewires that cognitive schema, not just planting that new belief, but nurturing it to help it thrive and grow. And cognitive behavioral therapy calls this practice cognitive restructuring, where you're identifying, challenging, and replacing unhelpful thoughts with more accurate ones. It's a little bit affirmations and a little of the harder work of putting those affirmations into real life practice. So, shall we dig into some real strategies to use as we go through this stuff that I covered up in the overview? So, first is journaling it out. And I know some people are journalers, some people aren't. And you don't have to be a journaler to journal something out. You don't have to be one of those people who likes to sit down and, write 5 pages of their thoughts every evening before they go to bed, or, one of those really super organized, wonderful people who can get up early enough in the morning to do a journal entry before they get ready for work. Goodness knows that's not me. Whether you sit down and do a sort of full exercise by listing and examining a bunch of limiting beliefs at once, or you make a note of them as they come along in that little notebook and go back to do some work on challenging them a little later, journaling your thoughts out is a powerful practice to help us figure out the belief, figure out its source, and then figure out how best for you, or in my case for me, to reframe it. So say you came up with the limiting belief, I'm terrible at public speaking. And yes, I'm going to dip into the very deep well of past experience here. This is definitely one I had to slay the demons about when I started public speaking for Threads of Life, to advocate for safer workplace cultures and the importance of workplace injury prevention. Not only did I have to slay that demon in order to speak in front of large groups of strangers, but I had to do it with the constant anxiety around the emotional content of my story and message. So back to that thought. I'm a terrible public speaker. I doubt many public speakers don't have this one, at least early in the game. Then the thought gets amplified. I always stumble on my words. I have to look at my notes. I don't look like those famous people in the infomercials, and people are going to judge me badly. I'm an introvert, and that whole public speaking exercise in grade 5 or 6, where we had to write something and then memorize it and say it in front of the entire class, was excruciating for me. I truly don't enjoy being in large groups of people, and although I thoroughly enjoy real conversations, whether it's with people I know or even strangers, I abhor meaningless small talk. And here I am, signing up to be a friggin' public speaker voluntarily and unpaid. Like, Jesus. Personally, I don't really buy into the positive affirmation idea for this one. Telling myself I'm a confident and articulate public speaker, I express myself with clarity, and I captivate my audience. But that's just me and my situation. So if it works for you, awesome, do it. I do, however, have 2 strategies that work for me. The first is reminding myself that sometimes it's the really uncomfortable things that matter in a positive way the most. Telling myself that 95% of the people in the room wouldn't have the guts to do what I do and aren't hearing my stammers and fumbles. They're hearing my story and maybe even admiring me for having the courage to do it. So take that, shame demon. And the third and most powerful one is kind of funny. I learned something that forever changed the way I experience public speaking when I started really researching, reading, and learning about emotional awareness and emotional intelligence. Anxiousness and excitement actually elicit the same sensations in our bodies. Our brain kind of registers them the same way. So I began to cognitively reframe, like literally talking to myself, when I'm getting ready to do a presentation. When I start to feel the usual anxiety begin to kick in, like, yes, every single fucking time, I literally tell myself, what you are feeling is excitement. You know your message is impactful and most people respect you for sharing. You are excited because you are making a difference. Literally works every time. Do I have the same sensations? The shaking hands, the ishy feeling in my stomach, the sweaty armpits? 100%. Does it allow me to walk up onto the stage and forward in life, really, with a little more confidence? 1000%. All right, so the next is mindfulness and a name the thought practice. This involves distancing yourself from the thought, thereby taking away its power. When you have a self-limiting thought, instead of assimilating that thought, this didn't work, I made a mistake equals I'm a failure, learn to observe it and identify it for what it is. I'm having the thought that I'm a failure. You can then go on to challenge it a bit. Is that thought accurate and factual? Or am I making a negative association between what happened and me personally? Is this situation, outcome, mistake really as bad as I'm making it out to be? Or even, what is something I've learned from what just happened? It takes a bit of time to get used to doing, and it's hard to catch every single self-limiting thought that pops into our head. But over time, with practice, you can rewire those circuits and improve your self-confidence. The next one is called the rubber band technique. And this one's used for a number of things in cognitive behavioral therapy. And its aim really is to reduce unwanted behaviors or thoughts by bringing them to our attention physically, or by attaching a negative consequence to it. And the idea here isn't to cause yourself pain. It's to give you a quick way to stop the thought in its tracks, to remind you to immediately reframe it, and condition you to have fewer of the negative thoughts in the future. And it's pretty simple. You just wear a rubber band on your wrist, and I prefer those wrapped elastic bands most girls to use to tie their ponytails, because you have to snap those pretty darn hard for them to actually hurt. And I find they both don't break as easily and don't get caught in my sleeves as much. But anyways, it should be tight enough that it doesn't slip and fall off, but not so tight that it's uncomfortable or cuts off your circulation. You really shouldn't notice it on your wrist most of the time. When you notice a negative thought or a self-limiting thought, give the rubber band a ping. The physical action and sensation should halt the thought, at which time you take just a second or two to reframe the thought. Use your affirmation mantra, or just even rewrite that thought in your head. The next one I'm going to talk about is called visualization and rehearsal. And I'm going to say this again and again, and likely again. Strategies or tools like visualization are not fluffy, metaphysical, woo-woo stuff aimed at people who dance with their cat under the full moon or live in communes on the West Coast. Advances in cognitive neuroscience, which includes functional brain imaging, MRIs, show that mental imagery makes use of many of the same neural pathways and areas in our brain as actually experiencing, like seeing, feeling, or doing something. Imagery of emotional events can activate our automatic nervous system and our amygdala in similar ways to actually experiencing, leading to physiological changes, so changes in our bodies. For example, imagining a threatening or frightening event can cause an increase in our heart rate, our breathing rate, and our skin temperature. Think about the last time you had a nightmare or a vivid dream. You weren't actually physically experiencing the event in your dream. They were all going on in your imagination in your head. But you woke up with your heart racing. You might have woken up feeling scared and maybe sweating a little. So the trick is that it's not about just sort of thinking about it or saying it to ourselves like a mantra. It's vividly picturing yourself living in a way that's in line with the new belief. Kind of like creating a high-resolution video of it in your head that actually helps our brain rehearse and solidify that shift. How would you move through the world and behave if you truly believed you are, you can, and you do, instead of those aren'ts, can'ts, and don'ts? This isn't magic. It's neuroscience, and it unlocks something pretty powerful, because when we start to believe we are, we can, and we do, we start to notice more and more things that support those beliefs about ourselves. It's a bit like taking off a blinder and being able to see the possibilities that you didn't realize were there before. And finally, act. Last but not least, dreaming and visualizing will only get you so far if you don't act on them. It's time to be a little bit brave and even find small ways to take a little bit of uncomfortable action. Because with every tiny successful action that you take that contradicts that limiting belief, you're removing a link from that chain in your mind. And don't get me wrong, not every action might be successful, and that might feel kind of shitty. But whatever you do, don't let it hold you back from taking those tiny steps forwards. Failure's a part of life, and accepting that with a what did I learn from that growth mindset instead of using it to reaffirm your limiting beliefs is an important, really important part of that process. But as much as I love mantras to help me take that first step, I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. Actions speak way louder than words. All right. So if you have a notebook or paper handy, today I'm going to leave you with these prompts to consider this week, whether you actually journal them out or just take them with you on your next walk. Make it kind, as always, and ask yourself, what's one belief I've carried for years that I now suspect might not be true? Where do I think that belief came from? If I could rewrite that belief into something more empowering, what would it sound like? This week we talked about limiting beliefs, what they are, where they come from, why it can be so difficult to let them go, and how you can start to identify yours and begin to free yourself from them. As we wrap up, I want you to remember, unlearning and releasing those limiting beliefs isn't erasing who you are. And it's not a one-time fix. It's a lifelong practice. Our brains are hardwired to try and protect us. So every experience, every so-called failure has the potential to act as a link being added to that invisible chain in our minds. Releasing our limiting beliefs isn't about denying the pain or the discomfort of those events, or pretending that we aren't hurt, scared, or uncertain. It's about breaking old habits, embracing a growth mindset, and gaining a better understanding of ourselves. And it's never too late to rewrite our beliefs to ones that are more empowering, ones that are more in line with who we want to be instead of who others want us to be, and beliefs that help us overcome obstacles and build our resilience. Don't forget, for more practical help to help you focus on and begin to honor your right to honor who you are, including setting boundaries, make sure you grab my Bounce Back Blueprint at transformativejourneys.ca or just scroll down to the link in the show notes. Thanks so much for being here with me today. Until next week, this is Johanna reminding you that it doesn't matter if you fall. What matters is how well you bounce. This is Transformative Journeys. See you next time. Want to know a not-so-secret secret about me? Knowing doesn't always mean I manage to do it all the time. Every episode, I learn more. And sometimes when I'm sharing what I've been learning or something I've figured out that I need to work on, I'm ripping off a gigantic cognitive or emotional fucking band-aid that's protecting a boo-boo I've been carrying around for decades. Insight does not automatically create change. Just because I've worked hard at trying to understand myself and my baggage doesn't mean I've developed some transformative superpowers and have it all figured out. Far from it. In fact, you know what? Just because I know I need to do something or work on something doesn't mean I'm always gonna fucking do it. Even if I want to do it and I try to do it, doesn't mean I do it all the time or that I always get it right. And if you happen to listen to the episode on PowerPoint Johanna, you'll know what a colossal fuck up that experience was. But I try. Like, I really try to take what I'm learning and use it to jettison some old baggage and move forward into the next chapter of my life as at least a moderately better person. Because all the awareness in the world means jack shit unless you take the challenge and meet it with some action. And let me tell you, that's where things start to get uncomfortable, because unlearning old thought patterns, habits, and beliefs sounds wonderful in theory, till we're standing face to face with whatever we've been avoiding. That conversation we've been putting off, that boundary we've been afraid to set or keep letting someone walk all over, taking that action or that chance we've convinced ourselves we're not ready for, doing something to move towards that dream we're sitting around waiting to feel confident enough to make happen. So here's a big something that I've learned. Confidence rarely comes first. Confidence also has zero to do with courage. In fact, confidence isn't the absence of fear. Confident people feel fear all the time. Confidence comes from stepping through the fear to do it anyway, even if that's just in baby steps. Confidence comes way after, in little dribbles over time. And it's not even consistent at all even then. In fact, it can be snatched away in a moment's notice. I've never been the same on my dirt bike since I tumbled off and broke my wrist. My confidence took a hit that not only have I not gotten back yet, it actually made me feel less confident than the first time I ever rode a dirt bike. But we spend so much of our lives and our energy believing that one day we'll finally feel ready to climb to the top of that big metal slide, ready to start the thing, ready to speak up for ourselves, ready to let go at the top of that slide, regardless of the ass-blistering ride we know's coming. But most of the time, readiness and confidence is something we discover when we get to the bottom of the slide and land on our feet, not at the foot of the ladder. And that's where the final conversation of this collection comes in. Because by the time I recorded this episode, I'd already spent months doing something that scared me. Tackling and fucking up the tech, putting my thoughts out into the world, dropping podcast episodes with my hand shaking on the mouse as I hit publish, taking the chance to ride down the slide that I'd only seen the big kids play on, and allowing myself to be seen. Not perfectly, God no, but confidently, yeah, maybe a little more recently, but most importantly, consistently. And somewhere along this ride, something pretty fascinating's happened. The fear hasn't completely disappeared, but it no longer gets to make the decisions. Although, transparency, some days, all the duct tape in the world and an industrial-sized metal door can't keep the imposter syndrome from escaping out of my attic to try to remind me that I'm not all that and a sprinkled donut. So the final episode in today's collection is about what happened when I kept showing up anyway. This is episode 40, Exposure Therapy in Real Time. What if the one thing you're kind of terrified to start ends up being a turning point leading you to exactly where you didn't know you needed to go? 40 episodes ago, I thought I was starting a podcast. Turns out, I was starting a whole new growth curve. You're going to love this one. So let's dig into that. Welcome back to Transformative Journeys with Johanna. I'm your host, Johanna, and I've got to tell you, when I realized that I was about to write my 40th episode, it kind of landed with a thump right in my midsection. Episode 40. 40 episodes. 40 times I've hit record. 40 times I've questioned both my courage and my sanity. 40 times I've agonized over the imperfections I hear like sirens in my ear every time I hit publish. When I've stuttered over a word, when the audio doesn't sound as perfect as all those podcast pros that I listen to. When I think after the fact that I could have maybe expanded or explained something a better way. But 40 times I did it scared, but I did it anyway. And that's a callback to episode 1, by the way. Maybe not as scared as I was my first few episodes, but definitely still nervous every time. Not because I think I shouldn't be doing it, and not because I really think I'm doing it wrong, but because I want to give you my very best every single time. And because imposter syndrome still lives in my attic, it's not as loud as it used to be thanks to the many rolls of metaphorical duct tape I've slapped across its mouth, but it's still there. So maybe it always will be. I've just locked the door and I won't let it out in the open as much anymore. So, in honor of the 40th episode that I wasn't sure I'd ever get to, today I'm going to do something a little different. Today, I'm giving you the good, the bad, the mildly embarrassing 40 things I've learned in 40 episodes. About fear, about growth, identity, about perfectionism, and why every single time I turn on the mic, it feels a bit like that nightmare where you're on stage and you realize you haven't got any clothes on. And of course, because I'm me and I can't help myself, I'm going to be grounding it with a bunch of psychology and neuroscience because, I know you want inside my head. So let's take a look at what actually happens when you decide to take a chance on being seen. So what's the first thing I've learned? Whether we like it or not, our brain, your brain, my brain, pretty much everyone's brain sees being judged and the possibility of being laughed at as a threat, as in a real threat to our safety. When you start putting your voice or yourself out in the world, your brain doesn't give a damn that you feel like you're doing it for all the right reasons. It cares about survival. It cares about whether our social circle, to our mammalian brain, our tribe, is going to exile us. And it's screaming, they're all going to laugh at you. And the way I said that is actually something my son used to say all the time to his sisters when they did something silly. But anyways, so research led by Naomi Eisenberg of UCLA showed that social rejection activates the dorsal portion of the anterior cingulate corset of our brain. Cortex of our brain. Sorry, corset. See, there you go. The same region of our brain involved in processing physical pain, which explains why when I'm hitting publish, it feels a bit like stepping barefoot onto one of my son's Lego cars. But this time the Lego's in the shape of public opinion. That's not shame, or that's not drama. That's neuroscience. So lesson number 2 is that if it scares me a little bit, good. It probably matters a lot to me. Lesson number 3 is that overthinking is fear believing it's disguised because it's wearing sensible shoes. And lesson number 4 is that fear diminishes with repetition. Mostly. My first few episodes, oh my God, amygdala in high alert mode, heart racing, shoulders tense, stop and remember to breathe, Johanna. 40 episodes in, just, the occasional mild existential crisis, fully managed with a few deep breaths before I hit record. So the lesson is that given a chance, our brain will learn. Okay, we've survived this. No need to panic. Am I still a little nervous? Yeah, of course I am. Fear still does show up. It just doesn't get the microphone anymore. All right, let's see. Lesson number 5. I've learned that perfectionism isn't necessarily about excellence. It's more often about emotions management. It's basically a self-soothing behavior to pat my nervous system on the head and tell it not to worry because I have everything under control. I've literally re-recorded entire sections because I could hear myself breathing into the mic. Did that change the meaning of what I'd said? Not even a little bit. I did it because it sounded imperfect. And Brene Brown's work on shame resilience talks a lot about this. In The Gifts of Imperfection, she talks about how perfectionism is a shield against vulnerability. It whispers to us, if it's flawless, they won't laugh at us. But perfectionism doesn't protect you from criticism. It just wastes valuable time and delays progress. Also, nobody noticed that weird breath, just me. Lesson number 6 is that we often dramatically overestimate how much other people notice our mistakes or care that we even made them. And research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in 2000 said that people overestimate the extent to which their actions and appearance are noted by others, a phenomenon dubbed the spotlight effect. Do I really think even one person listening thought, hey, she stumbled over that word? Nope. They were probably driving to work, cooking dinner with chaos in the background, writing their grocery list. The realization that most people are not analyzing you, and especially not the ones you should care about, is remarkably freeing. Lesson 7, comparison is a Wi-Fi thief. It steals your bandwidth and it robs you of joy. And the words that are attributed to Oscar Wilde, be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. Which brings me to lesson 8. You can't stage manage authenticity. Have you noticed a slightly edgier or maybe spicier side to my podcasts recently? Yes, I want to help people. Yes, I want my actual content to be taken seriously. And truth, most of what I talk about are serious issues that many of us deal with in our lives, including me. But anyone who actually knows me knows that 100% serious, I am most definitely not. I've got a dry, some say sarcastic sense of humor and the vocabulary of a sailor on shore leave. Burying that to be taken seriously wasn't being authentic to me. It was fear of not being taken seriously and fear of being seen as who I am. So fair warning issued, right? So lesson 9 is that we're allowed to evolve. With the exception of, some neurons, brain cells, some heart muscles, and your tooth enamel, none of the cells in your body are the same as they were 10 years ago. Some turn over in as little as days, weeks, or a few months. Why should we think that we need to be the same person we were last week, last month, or last year? And evolution in public, as scary as it is, it's actually particularly empowering. Lesson 10 is that identity shifts are uncomfortable because our brain prefers to keep running old and often outdated scripts. It far prefers uncomfortable certainty of what it knows now over what it sees as the chaos and threat of change. And lesson 11 is that our brain feels threatened by growth because it loves predictable discomfort over unpredictable change. And going back to humor, so let's make this lesson number, what are we at, 12? Why do I make jokes or sprinkle my, some would say, dry-witted sarcasm throughout my podcast? Because humor is a nervous system regulator. Healing work without levity is exhausting, and humor actually reduces our body's stress response. One of the best things in the world for relieving stress is a good belly laugh, but even a good chuckle can reduce it. And studies show that laughter lowers cortisol and increases one of our feel-good hormones, which are endorphins. Humor isn't dismissing or denying our pain. And it took an entire session with my amazing grief counselor after my son died to accept that laughing wasn't dishonoring my grief over his death. And in fact, it was in many ways honoring his life, because one of the things he loved to do was to make people laugh. Sometimes laughter is just a way for our nervous system to exhale after metaphorically holding its breath. And also, life is funny. Sometimes embarrassingly funny, sometimes painfully funny, sometimes, did that just happen? Kind of funny. Even at what feels like the worst times, funny things can happen. You get it. Lesson 13 has been that it's okay to get better in real time. Being a work in progress as you're doing it scared, but doing it anyways. Lesson 14 is courtesy of my imposter syndrome and living up there in my attic, quieter than it used to be, but very much still an unwelcome squatter living rent-free in my head. And unlike actual rent-free squatters, this one doesn't even take the garbage out. An article in Psychology Today said that the term imposter syndrome can be traced back to research by psychologists Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Susan Imes, who originally used the term imposter phenomenon, which later became known as imposter syndrome, in their 1978 research paper, The Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women. But it's common in people of any gender. It's that voice in your head saying, "Who do you think you are?" But imposter syndrome doesn't mean you're a fraud or that you're unqualified. It means you're stretching outside your comfort zone. And that's good for you. Lesson 15 is that self-doubt, thanks to imposter syndrome, gets loudest just before some really good growth happens. Identity shifts, the internal ones that mean how we see ourselves, has changed, scare the shit out of our nervous system. But self-trust grows with aligned action. And that's lesson 16. Lesson 17 is about how that happens. Alignment happens when our actions stop arguing with our values. Self-trust happens when I give myself evidence that I'm saying, doing, and trying to live what I talk to you about. Every time I hit publish, in spite of my fear and insecurities, I'm showing myself this is who I am, not who I want to be, who I am. And that self-trust isn't built in my comfort zone. It's built by stepping right into the arena and doing something that's important to me. And my hero, Brené Brown, often refers to a quote from Theodore Roosevelt's speech in 1910, and it made a huge impact on how I see my life and made me worry a lot less about what people will think. And the quote is, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." Lesson 18, entirely pragmatic. And it popped in here because it happened while I was writing the episode. Writing or editing while you're hungry isn't recommended, so I'm going to break from my mid-roll rest message to grab a snack while my other me tells you about my free resources. So where were we? Lesson 19. You don't suddenly become brave. You practice brave. Sometimes in teeny tiny baby steps. Sometimes you're just never going to feel ready or prepared enough or strong enough. Our brains don't want us to. So you just act. Bravery will catch up later, when your brain feels a little bit safer. You don't become confident first. You act in alignment long enough that your brain eventually believes you. And lesson 20 is that courage compounds. Keep showing up. Fear and alignment can coexist. And every time you show up, and you do it anyways, you're building courage to keep on showing up. Lesson 21, was that I can't control opinion. This one's been a bit ouchy sometimes. Sometimes I poured my heart and soul into an episode that hardly saw any downloads. Other ones that I thought might land for maybe a limited audience, or where I thought the topic might be a little touchy for some people, or even where I thought the audio wasn't just right, have had some of my highest download numbers. Like, go figure. But what I really mean by this is that I had to learn that just because it was important to me and I wanted to talk about it doesn't mean that it's going to be important for anyone else. And going back to that spotlight effect, apparently nobody who listens actually cares if I stammer over a word or my audio isn't production perfect, or they don't even notice. So spotlight turned off. 22 was an internal one for sure. One I kind of knew before I even started. But just like everyone else, I love my little hits of dopamine when I see my download numbers go up. And some days I refresh stats like it's a slot machine. Downloads are not a measure of impact. I've told myself from the beginning that if each episode helps even one person going through something hard, then it's worth doing. And not everyone's going to be my audience. So that's lesson number 23. And that's fine. I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not Mel Robbins. And truth, not everyone's their audience either. And I'm going to go back to those download numbers I didn't predict. Lesson number 24 is that sometimes the episode I almost didn't do might be the one someone actually needed to hear. All right, let's move things along here because I try to keep these episodes around 30 minutes-ish. And if I keep this up, I'm going to be here for an hour. I said 40 lessons, so 40 lessons it will be, but the rest I'm going to do rapid fire style, as if I'm speaking to myself. Lesson number 25, analytics are just data, not identity, not self-value. Lesson number 26, you do not need universal approval to have impact. Lesson number 27, you can survive a bad download week. Your ancestors survived winters living in a cave. This isn't a big deal. Lesson 28, saying it imperfectly is better than not saying it at all. The people who get it, get it. The people who don't, wouldn't have anyways. Lesson 29, feeling yourself cringe is sometimes just you staring at growth you're not sure you're ready for. Lesson 30, your body can be sending you the message that something isn't safe, even when you logically know you're just fine. Lesson number 31 is that vulnerability hangovers are a real thing. Did I really just tell everyone that and publish it out into the world? Hydrate by reading some of Brene Brown's books. Lesson number 3, done is a resilience strategy. Stop typing, stop overthinking, stop reanalyzing, take it as done, and hit record, Johanna. Lesson number 33 is that confidence isn't the starting point. It's the outcome. You don't wait for courage and then act. You act, and your brain updates the software later. Lesson 34, not how you thought it would sound out loud. Thought something you wish thought of something you wished you'd said after the recording was done, publish it anyways. There's always another episode. Lesson number 35, visibility builds resilience and courage. There are no saber-toothed tigers on Facebook or Instagram, just algorithms, slightly less dangerous, slightly. So just share the post and move along. Lesson number 36. This was a hard one. Rest is not laziness. I am still a work in progress on this one. I love doing this so much, and I often have to force myself to turn off my computer and just go do some of that rest thing. Lesson number 37 is that the work changes you. I have learned so much about myself while doing this podcast. It's not just the stuff I've talked about today. Sometimes something really shifted around episode 8 inside of me, the Dear 20-Year-Old Me episode. And every few episodes, I can feel something shift again. And it's good. Lesson 38. Those versions of me, 20-year-old me, the me who pressed play for the first time, they would be proud of me. And 5 years down the road from now, I know I will be grateful that I started this when I did. Lesson number 39 is that learning how to become comfortable in your skin, that ain't comfortable work at all. And lesson number 40, this is a big one and it circles back to episode number 1. Scared? Start anyways. So this week's reflection prompt might not be an easy one because self-honesty can be funny or it can be painful. But if you have a notebook or a paper handy, here's something you can journal out or just take on your next walk. As I always say, make it kind, but be honest. And as always, be self-compassionate. What would the version of you 5 years from now be proud you started today? Even if you're scared. This week, I shared 40 lessons that doing this podcast has taught me. 40 episodes ago, I didn't know if anyone but my husband would even listen to any of them. But that wasn't actually the point. What I didn't realize back then was that the biggest challenges wouldn't be what to talk about, whether anyone would listen, or how to balance doing this with a full-time job and my volunteer work. It would be getting used to being seen and using the actual stuff I was talking about to regulate my own nervous system while I was being vulnerable, fighting with my imposter syndrome, and doing the work with you. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. If you're in the trenches of healing, speaking up, learning to build boundaries, or just changing directions, I see you. Fear and discomfort, they're not stop signs. Courage takes practice, so keep practicing, even if it's in baby steps. I'm not special. It took a long time for me to see resilience, courage, or bravery in myself. And I still have self-doubt. I have it all the time. So if your nervous system starts firing up when you think about doing something new, that might not be danger. That might be growth, hiding behind the same cool shades that fear does. Thank you for being here with me today. Until next time, this is Johanna reminding you that it doesn't matter if you fall. What matters is how well you bounce. This is Transformative Journeys. See you next time. Well, my friends, we've taken quite a journey together today. From taking chances, whether we're ready or not, to cross-examining the narratives that became part of the stories we might have been carrying for way longer than they deserve, to tackling the really hard work of looking at those stories more objectively and deciding it might be time to just jettison some of those old, outdated, and unwanted beliefs. And we ended our journey by exploring how growth isn't something we think our way into. It's something we step into. Sometimes one hesitant, uncertain baby step at a time. We can't grow without some practice or without a few growing pains along the way. When I think back to when I began thinking about doing this podcast, I thought at the time I was just creating something that was going to stretch me a little and hopefully help others a lot. An opportunity to share some of the things I've learned through some of the harder chapters of my life. And I think I've done those things. What took me a bit by surprise along the way was how much this podcast would become part of my own growth journey too. Because it turned out that the things I've talked about weren't just things I've learned or things I've been through. Maybe some of them were, but mainly they've been things I'm learning now. Sometimes repeatedly, because sometimes I ignore my own advice myself. Sometimes the hard way, because if you've been here before, you might have heard me mention that I tend to take the long and rocky road to figure it all out. Sometimes with my imposter syndrome screaming and pounding at the attic door to get out. And I'm still discovering that I have plenty of my own stories left to rewrite. And that's okay. Because the only finish line is one at the very, very end of the road. And maybe I'm finding on my own journey that running underneath the themes of all the episodes that came before this one is that it's okay if life changes us. I think that's inevitable. And maybe it's not just okay to become someone different than you've always been, than everyone's always expected you to be. Maybe we deserve to. And we have way more agency in who we become next than we might realize. And if you think back through the journey we took today, you'll realize the episodes might have explored different ideas, different themes, but they're all connected. Maybe like with a bubbling stream, weaving in and out and across the path that we took to get to that park with the stinking hot giant metal slide. And maybe it's a nice cool stream that we can sit our blistered ass in after we take the brave steps to climb up the ladder of uncertainty, let go at the top to make what could be a painful descent, not really knowing if we'll land on our feet at the bottom, but having the courage to take a chance and do it anyways. I will see you in a couple of weeks for season 2 and my 50th episode. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Come say hi on Instagram at transformativejourneys.johanna or visit my website and say hi to me there. If you like a little bit more bang for your buck, there's an enhanced version of this podcast on YouTube. On-screen prompts, beautiful visuals, and a more immersive experience. So head over to my YouTube channel, Transformative Journeys, to check it out. And if you have an idea that you'd like to hear me talk about, leave me a message and you might see it in a future episode. Until next time, this is Johanna reminding you that it doesn't matter if you fall. What matters is how well you bounce. This is Transformative Journeys. See you next time. Hey, just a disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and should not replace the advice of a medical or mental health expert. I'm not a licensed counselor or therapist, just a human with a mic and a story of growth and resilience. No degree, no fancy letters after my name. I'm a full-time student at the School of Hard Knocks, University of Life, where I figure I'll graduate when I take my last breath. In other words, I'm just Johanna, a fellow human being on my journey through this thing called life, and your guide on this transformative journey.